Princess Valara sat on her high throne, watching the grand hall of the celestial court fill with nobles, warriors, and diplomats. The golden pillars shimmered under the soft glow of floating lanterns, and the scent of exotic flowers lingered in the air. It was another royal gathering, another night where she was expected to choose a suitor. She had no interest in them. Her father, the emperor, sat beside her, wearing a regal expression. His deep blue robes shimmered with embedded stardust, and his crown radiated authority. The moment he raised his hand, the hall fell silent. "Princess Valara," he announced, his voice firm. "The finest suitors from across the empire have come to seek your favor. They bring power, wealth, and strength. You must choose wisely." Valara kept her face calm, but inside, she was tired of this game. Every suitor who stood before her was the same, boastful, arrogant, and desperate to claim her as a trophy. The first suitor stepped forward. A towering Drakmar warlord, covered in thick armored scales, slammed his spear into the marble floor. "I command 10 war fleets," he declared, his voice a low growl. "With me, you will rule the stars." Valara tilted her head. "And what would you offer me, beyond ships and soldiers?" The warlord smirked. "Protection. Power. You will be feared across the universe." She sighed. Next, a wealthy Zephyr noble came forward, his silk robes trailing behind him. "My family controls half of the empire's economy," he boasted. "Marry me, and you will never want for anything." Valara's lips curled into a smirk. "I do not lack wealth." The noble's face paled. But next, one by one, the suitors tried to impress her, showing off their riches, strength, or battle victories. None of them sparked even a moment of interest. The nobles whispered among themselves. The suitors glanced at each other, confused and frustrated. And then he spoke. A human. Valara barely noticed him at first. He wasn't dressed like a noble or a warrior. He didn't wear expensive robes or carry weapons. He sat at the back of the hall, leaning against a marble pillar with a glass of something in his hand. "Is this supposed to be impressive?" he muttered to himself, though his voice carried across the silent hall. The nobles gasped. The suitors stiffened. Valara raised an eyebrow, amused. "You, human." She gestured for him to step forward. He hesitated, then sighed and walked toward the throne. His movements were relaxed, casual, as if he wasn't standing in front of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy. "What is your name?" Valara asked. "Caleb Drayton," he replied, standing before her. His eyes, unlike the others, were steady. He wasn't intimidated. "You are not a suitor," she observed. "Nope," Caleb said simply, taking a sip of his drink. "Just here for the negotiations." The emperor frowned. "You mock this sacred gathering, human?" Caleb shook his head. "Not at all. But watching these guys act like they can buy a person with war fleets and treasure. Yeah, that's kind of ridiculous." The hall fell into dead silence. Valara blinked, then, to everyone's shock, she laughed. A soft, genuine laugh. The first real one in weeks. "Interesting," she murmured. Caleb set his drink down. "Look, princess, you don't care about any of these guys, and I get it. They're just throwing their titles at you like that's all that matters. But the thing is, titles fade. Power shifts. What's left after that?" The nobles murmured in outrage. One of the suitors growled, clenching his fists. Caleb shrugged. "If you really want to be impressed, maybe you should look outside this hall. See what life is really like. You might actually enjoy it." Valara leaned forward, intrigued. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had dared. "Are you suggesting I abandon my royal duties?" she challenged. "I'm saying you should decide for yourself what's worth your time," Caleb said simply. "You're smart enough to know the difference." For the first time that evening, Valara felt something other than boredom. Curiosity. She studied the human before her. He wasn't a warrior, a noble, or a ruler. He didn't offer power or riches, but he was different. And for the first time, she wanted to know more. The emperor's voice interrupted the moment. Enough, he said, his tone cold. The princess must make a decision. Valara stood, her royal robes flowing behind her. Her golden eyes gleamed with a new kind of challenge. I will not choose any of these suitors, she declared. None have impressed me. The nobles gasped. The suitors stared in shock. She turned to Caleb. However, the human has piqued my interest. Caleb blinked. Wait, what? A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. You said I should look beyond this hall. Very well. You will show me what impresses a human. The court erupted into chaos. And Caleb, he just sighed and muttered, I really need to learn when to keep my mouth shut. The celestial court was in an uproar. Nobles whispered in shock. The rejected suitors fumed. The emperor's expression remained unreadable, but his silence carried the weight of his authority. But Princess Valara did not care. She stood tall, her golden eyes fixed on Caleb Drayton, the only human in the hall. She had just done the unthinkable. She had rejected every suitor and declared interest in a man who wasn't even trying to impress her. Caleb, however, looked less like a victorious man and more like someone who had just stepped into trouble. He ran a hand through his short brown hair and sighed. So, just to be clear, he muttered, I was just talking. You know, making conversation. Valara smirked. And yet, you have my attention. The emperor finally spoke. His voice was firm, unwavering. Princess, this is highly irregular. Valara turned to face him. Father, you have always said I should choose wisely. I did. None of the suitors impressed me. But this human, he spoke the truth. He challenged me. That is worth my time. One of the rejected suitors, a towering Draknar warlord, clenched his fists. This is insulting, he growled. A human is nothing compared to warriors of our status. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You guys sure talk a lot about status. What do you even do for fun? Count your medals. A few nobles gasped. Some even laughed, quickly covering their mouths to avoid attention. The Draknar warlord stepped forward, his eyes burning with rage. Say that again, human. Caleb, never one to back down, did exactly that. I said, what do you do for fun? Because so far it looks like your only personality trait is standing around looking tough. The warlord let out a deep growl. His massive hand shot out toward Caleb, but before he could grab him, Valara stepped in front of the human. The entire court froze. Valara's expression was calm, but her presence radiated authority. Do you dare to raise your hand against someone under my interest? The Draknar warrior hesitated. The room fell into complete silence. You are dismissed, Valara said coldly. The warrior glared at Caleb before storming away. Caleb let out a breath. That guy needs to take up a hottie. Valara turned back to him, her smirk returning. You have a dangerous tongue, human. Caleb shrugged. And yet, here we are. The emperor watched their exchange carefully. Then he sighed. Very well, princess. If this human has truly intrigued you, then prove it. Valara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You claim he is different, that he is worth your attention, the emperor said. Then let him show you. Caleb frowned. Wait, what? The emperor leaned forward on his throne. You will take the princess beyond these palace walls. Show her what impresses a human. If she still believes you are worth her time after that, then I will allow this interest to continue. The room erupted with murmurs. Valara crossed her arms. You would allow me to leave the palace. The emperor nodded. With him. Caleb scratched the back of his head. Just so I understand, my big mouth just got me assigned as the royal tour guide. Valara smirked. Apparently. The emperor's voice carried finality. You leave tomorrow. Choose wisely, daughter. The court session ended, but the tension lingered. The suitors, rejected and humiliated, left with stormy expressions. The nobles debated among themselves, whispering about how a human had turned the princess's attention away from powerful leaders. Caleb found himself walking alongside Valara as the palace servants prepared for her temporary departure. He glanced at her. "So this is really happening?" She chuckled. "It seems so. And you, human, will show me your world." Caleb sighed. "This was not in my job description." Valara smirked. "Then consider it a challenge." The morning sun bathed the royal palace in a golden glow. For the first time in years, Princess Valara wasn't preparing for a diplomatic meeting, a royal gathering, or a lesson in state affairs. Today, she was leaving the palace. And it was all because of a human. She stood at the grand entrance, wearing a simple dark cloak over her royal attire. Her golden eyes shone with curiosity as she turned to Caleb Drayton, the human who had unknowingly changed the course of her life. "You're sure about this?" Caleb asked, adjusting the small travel pack slung over his shoulder. He wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just a plain jacket, cargo pants, and boots. Practical. Functional. Valara smirked. "You were the one who suggested it." Caleb exhaled. "Yeah, but I didn't think your dad would actually go for it." "The Emperor gave his word," she said, stepping forward confidently. "Now, it is time for you to fulfill your part of the challenge." Caleb sighed. "Right. Babysitting a space princess. Just another day in the life of an Earth guy." Valara raised an eyebrow. "If this is how humans complain, I hope your lessons will be more interesting than your words." Caleb chuckled. All right. First rule of exploring. Blend in." He reached into his pack and pulled out a hooded cloak, tossing it to her. She caught it easily. "Wear this," he said. "We don't want people bowing and panicking every time they see your royal face." Valara narrowed her eyes but put on the cloak anyway. As soon as the hood covered her shimmering golden hair, she felt different, hidden, free. She took a deep breath. "Where are we going first?" Caleb grinned. "To see the real world." The streets of Zarethis Prime. The capital city was a vast, sprawling metropolis. Floating bridges crisscrossed the skyline, neon signs pulsed with alien symbols, and towering skyscrapers stretched high into the sky. The streets below bustled with life. Traders, workers, and visitors from every corner of the galaxy. For the first time in years, Valara was among her people without guards, without titles, without expectations. She felt alive. Caleb led her through the market district, where alien vendors shouted out their best deals. A blue-skinned merchant waved a tray of steaming food. Fresh Xeric skewers, best in the city. Valara stopped, inhaling the delicious scent. Her royal meals were always carefully prepared, balanced, and boring. This, however, smelled dangerous and exciting. Caleb noticed her hesitation and grinned. "Ever had street food?" She shook her head. "It is not permitted for someone of my rank." "Well, consider this lesson one." Caleb pulled out a few credits, handed them to the vendor, and took 2 skewers. He handed one to her. She examined the grilled meat curiously before taking a small bite. The flavor exploded in her mouth. Spicy, smoky, a little sweet. Her golden eyes widened. "This is good." Caleb smirked. "Welcome to the real world, princess." She took another bite, then another, eating faster than she had intended. Caleb laughed. "Easy there. We've got a long day ahead." Valara wiped her lips with the back of her hand. "What next?" Caleb pointed toward a repair station, where a group of workers struggled to fix a hovering cargo drone. Sparks flew as one of them accidentally short-circuited the controls. The drone wobbled dangerously, almost crashing into a nearby stall. One worker, a reptilian Vorin, groaned. "Useless machine. It will take hours to repair." Caleb stepped forward. "I can take a look." The workers exchanged skeptical glances. What does a human know about Zarathian tech? Caleb shrugged. "A lot." Before anyone could protest, He pulled a small tool from his belt and knelt beside the malfunctioning drone. In minutes, he rerouted the power, reset the control panel, and got the drone humming smoothly again. The Voron's eyes widened. "You fixed it." Caleb dusted off his hands. "Yeah, it wasn't that hard." Valara watched, fascinated. In the palace, problems were always delegated. Advisors, engineers, scholars. But Caleb had seen a problem and fixed it himself. No hesitation, no waiting, just action. She had never seen a suitor do anything like that. The turning point. As they walked through the market, Valara kept glancing at Caleb, trying to understand him. "You are different," she admitted finally. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Because I don't wear armor or wave a giant sword around." Valara shook her head. "Because you do things. You don't just talk about power or wealth. You act. That is unusual." Caleb smirked. "Humans aren't the strongest species. We don't have natural armor or super speed. But we think. We build. We adapt." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was learning something truly valuable. The day continued. More sights, more experiences, more lessons about how ordinary people lived. Valara found herself laughing, running, exploring like a child seeing the world for the first time. By the time the sun began to set, she turned to Caleb with a new realization. "You were right," she said. Caleb blinked. "About what?" She looked at the vibrant city around them. "Power and wealth are nothing compared to the ability to truly live." He grinned. "Told you so." Valara smirked. "Then I suppose I shall need more lessons." Caleb chuckled. "Guess that means I'm stuck with you for a while." She tilted her head. "Or maybe I am stuck with you." As the stars began to shine, something between them shifted. A connection, an understanding, a spark, and neither of them wanted it to fade. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the vibrant lights of Zerethus Prime illuminated the city. The bustling marketplace had begun to slow, but Princess Valara was far from ready to return to the palace. For the first time in her life, she had tasted freedom, and she wasn't ready to let it go. She walked beside Caleb Drayton, the human who had unknowingly become her guide into a world she had never truly seen. He moved with a relaxed confidence, hands in his pockets, as if he had no worries at all. "You enjoyed today," Caleb said, glancing at her. Valara smirked. "You expected otherwise." He shrugged. "You grew up in a palace. I figured you'd be overwhelmed." She tilted her head. "You misunderstand, human. I am not fragile." Caleb grinned. "Oh, I know. But let's see how well you do in my world." Valara raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is your world?" Caleb gestured toward a massive training ground ahead, a military facility where warriors from different species tested their combat skills. The facility hummed with activity. Soldiers trained with weapons, sparred in hand-to-hand combat, and tested advanced battle suits. Valara's smirk widened. This would be interesting. The training grounds. The moment they stepped inside, all eyes turned toward them. A human and a princess, walking into a place dominated by warriors. Caleb ignored the stares. He led Valara to an observation deck overlooking the combat arena, where warriors clashed in intense duels. "Your father's suitors love to talk about strength," Caleb said, watching as a Draknar warrior smashed his opponent into the ground. "But do they actually have it?" Valara's golden eyes gleamed. "Strength is more than just brute force." A deep voice interrupted them. "You speak of strength, human." They turned to see a massive Exiroth warrior approaching. His armored body glowed faintly with bioenergy, and his sharp reptilian features twisted into a smirk. "This is no place for a fragile creature like you," the Exiroth sneered. "Go back to your books and leave battle to real warriors." Caleb chuckled. "Real warriors? You mean the guys who think lifting the heaviest weapon makes them the best?" The Tyroth warrior's eyes narrowed. You dare mock me? Valara, amused, crossed her arms. I would be careful, warrior. This human is unexpected. The Axairoth let out a low growl. Then let him prove it. A murmur ran through the crowd. A duel challenge had been issued. Valara glanced at Caleb. You do not have to accept. Caleb grinned. Oh, but I want to. The duel. The combat arena was large, surrounded by energy shields that flickered in anticipation of the fight. Warriors from all species gathered to watch. The human versus the Kairoth. Caleb rolled his shoulders. Rules. The Axairoth smirked. Simple. Knock me down, and you win. Valara watched carefully. She had seen countless warriors fight. Brutal, direct, and predictable. But Caleb, he was different. The duel began. The Axairoth lunged forward, his massive fists swinging like hammers. The impact would have shattered stone. But Caleb wasn't there. He sidestepped, moving like water, letting the Xairoth's own strength carry him too far forward. Before the warrior could recover, Caleb spun behind him and kicked the back of his knee. The Tyroth stumbled, his balance momentarily broken. The watching warriors murmured in surprise. The Axairoth turned with a snarl and swung again, faster this time. Caleb barely dodged, ducking under the strike and rolling away. He wasn't trying to match strength. He was using speed, intelligence, and precision. Valara's eyes shone with admiration. The Tyroth warrior, frustrated, rushed forward in a blind attack. Caleb dropped low, catching his opponent's arm, and with a swift motion, redirected the warrior's force against him. The Xairoth's own momentum sent him crashing into the ground. Silence filled the arena. Caleb stepped back, breathing lightly. Still think strength is just about size. The Axairoth groaned but pushed himself up. His anger had faded, replaced with something else. Respect. You are not weak, the warrior admitted. The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter. Even some of the strongest warriors looked at Caleb with newfound interest. Valara smiled. She had known there was something different about this human. He had just proved it to everyone. The princess's realization. As they left the training grounds, Caleb stretched. So, still think humans are weak? Valara smirked. I never thought that. But I will admit, you continue to surprise me. She paused. Then, in a quieter voice, she added, that was impressive. Caleb grinned. Finally, some credit. Valara laughed softly. But inside, she felt something shift. For years, she had been surrounded by warriors who only valued power, status, and control. But Caleb had shown her another kind of strength, adaptability, intelligence, and skill, and it fascinated her. For the first time, she wasn't just curious about a human. She was drawn to him. The sky above Zerethis Prime shimmered with floating lanterns as night fell over the city. The day had been long, filled with unexpected adventures, but Princess Valara felt more awake than ever. She walked alongside Caleb Drayton, her cloak still concealing her royal identity. Their steps were slow, unhurried, as they moved through the quiet streets. The echoes of the training duel still lingered in her mind, the way Caleb had outmaneuvered his opponent, the way he had fought with skill, not brute force. It was strange. All her life, she had been surrounded by warriors, nobles, and suitors who flaunted their strength, their power, their influence. But none of them had impressed her the way this human had. And that bothered her. She glanced at him, observing the way he moved so easily, relaxed, confident, yet always aware of his surroundings. There was no arrogance in his stance, no desperation to prove himself. And for the first time, she questioned everything she had been taught about strength. A dangerous whisper. As they reached a quiet plaza, Caleb stretched his arms and sighed. All right, princess. What's the plan now? Or do I keep showing you how humans do things? Valara smirked. I must admit, Your lessons have been entertaining. Entertaining, Caleb scoffed. I just took down a giant lizard guy in front of an entire army of warriors. That deserves more than just entertaining. Valara chuckled but said nothing. Her thoughts were elsewhere. The day had been eye-opening, but she could not ignore the weight of royal duty pressing down on her. This was not just an adventure. It was a test, a challenge set by her father. And at the end of it, she would have to make a choice. Would she return to the life expected of her, choosing the suitor for political gain, for duty, for tradition? Or, she shook her head. No, that was not an option. The court's disapproval. A sudden humming sound broke her thoughts. A royal drone hovered in front of them, a sleek, golden machine bearing the emperor's insignia. A message played, the voice of Grand Chancellor Vareth, one of her father's closest advisors. Princess Valara, your actions today have caused great disturbance in the court. Your father allows you this freedom, but know this, the nobles are displeased. The suitors feel insulted, and many whisper that you are being reckless. Valara's hands clenched into fists. The Chancellor's voice continued, return to the palace soon. You have obligations to uphold. The Empire cannot afford its princess to be seen as distracted. The drone powered down and flew away, disappearing into the night sky. Caleb watched her carefully. Well, that sounded dramatic. Valara exhaled slowly. The nobles do not like change. Caleb leaned against a nearby railing. Yeah, I got that part. But the real question is, what do you want? She hesitated. That question was far more dangerous than anything she had faced in the training grounds. A question she couldn't answer. Valara crossed her arms, turning to face him. You ask as if I have a choice. Caleb frowned. You do. Everyone does. She let out a dry laugh. No, human. Not everyone. I was born to rule, to secure alliances, to ensure peace. My choices are not my own. Caleb studied her for a moment, then shook his head. That's the biggest pile of nonsense I've ever heard. She blinked. Excuse me. He stepped closer, his expression serious. Look, I get that you've got responsibilities, but you're also a person, not a contract. And if a bunch of fancy nobles are trying to force you into a life you don't want, then maybe it's time to break the rules. Valara's breath caught for a moment. Break the rules. She had never been told that before. For years, she had followed the laws of the court, the expectations of her title, the path that had been decided for her before she was even born. But Caleb was standing here, challenging all of it. And the worst part, she didn't hate it. She wanted to listen. The growing divide. Before she could respond, a group of armored guards approached from the far end of the plaza. They moved in perfect formation, their polished uniforms bearing the royal crest. Valara recognized them instantly, her father's personal guards. Their leader, a tall, sharp-eyed soldier, bowed deeply. Princess, your presence is requested at the palace immediately. Caleb raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Valara's expression turned cold. I was given freedom to explore. The guard hesitated. Yes, but your actions today have caused unrest. It is best you return. She turned to Caleb, an unspoken question in her eyes. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess that's my cue to disappear. Ha. Valara's jaw tightened. I do not wish for this to end. Caleb smirked. Well, that makes two of us. She turned back to the guards. Tell my father I will return, but not yet. The guards hesitated, then bowed. As you command, princess. As they walked away, Caleb nudged her shoulder. So, breaking the rules. Valara smirked. Perhaps. But inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Because now she was no longer just questioning her choices. She was questioning everything. And Caleb Drayton was at the center of it all. The royal palace loomed ahead, its towering spires glowing under the soft light of Zerethus Prime's twin moons. The air was heavy with tension as Princess Valara walked through the grand corridors, her cloak swaying behind her. She was finally returning home, but she did not feel the same as when she had left. A day outside the palace with a human had changed everything. Her thoughts were a tangled storm: duty, expectations, tradition. And yet, one voice kept echoing in her mind. You have a choice. Caleb Drayton, the human who had no power, no noble title, and no political weight, had shaken the very foundation of her beliefs. He had shown her that strength was not about domination, but action. That power was not about status, but about making choices that mattered. And now, she would have to make the hardest choice of all. The court's judgment. The royal throne room was filled with nobles, warriors, and advisors. The moment Valara stepped inside, all eyes turned toward her. At the center of the room sat Emperor Zeradorn, her father, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Grand Chancellor Varith stood with his hands behind his back, his face stern. You have returned, the Emperor said, his voice calm but firm. Valara stepped forward, as I said I would. The whispers in the court were deafening. She was seen walking freely among commoners, with the human. The suitors will not accept this insult. Valara ignored them. The Chancellor cleared his throat. Princess, your actions have caused concern. The suitors have expressed their displeasure. The noble houses question your judgment. The empire requires stability. Not what? Valara interrupted, her golden eyes sharp. Not independence. The court fell silent. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Not recklessness. Valara smirked. How is it reckless to learn about the world beyond these walls? The Emperor finally leaned forward. Tell me, my daughter, what have you learned? She hesitated for only a second before answering. That power is not just about wealth or warships. That strength is not measured in bloodlines or titles, and that wisdom is not found in rooms full of people who all think the same way. The court murmured louder, but the Emperor raised a hand, silencing them. Continue, he commanded. Valara straightened. You allowed me to explore, and what I found was a new perspective. A human, one without armies or riches, showed me a kind of strength that none of my suitors ever did. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. The Chancellor sighed. Princess, a human is not. I am not finished, she cut in. He showed me what it means to think for myself. A long silence followed. Her father studied her carefully. Then he spoke. And have you made a decision? The suitor's wrath. Before she could answer, a loud voice interrupted. This is an insult. The Draknar warlord, one of the most powerful suitors, stepped forward. His massive frame radiated fury. You waste time with a human. You humiliate those who came seeking your hand in alliance. This is a disgrace to the Empire. Murmurs of agreement filled the court. Valara's fingers curled into fists. Caleb's words echoed in her mind. Break the rules. Slowly, she turned to the Draknar warrior. Tell me, warlord, why do you seek my hand? The warrior frowned. Because our union would make us *** unstoppable. Together, we would command the greatest fleets. So you seek power, she interrupted. The Draknar's jaw tightened, as any ruler should. Valara's golden eyes glowed with defiance. Then you have answered my question. She turned away from him and faced her father. Yes, I have made my decision. The declaration. The throne room held its breath. Valara lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. I will not choose a suitor based on power or wealth. Gasps, shock, outrage. The Chancellor stepped forward. Princess, I will choose based on what I decide is right for my future. The Draknar warrior growled. And what future is that? Valara exhaled. And then, with a slow, deliberate confidence, she said, the one I choose for myself. The court exploded into chaos. The Emperor's verdict. Through the noise, Emperor Zeradorn raised a single hand. Silence fell instantly. His piercing gaze settled on his daughter. "You defy the expectations of the court," he said slowly. "You risk alliances, stability, and tradition." Vaylura did not flinch. "I do." The Emperor's eyes studied her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he let out a deep, rumbling chuckle. The nobles stared in disbelief. The Emperor leaned back. "Very well, my daughter." A stunned hush settled over the court. The Emperor's deep voice echoed through the chamber. "You have chosen to walk your own path. Then prove that you are worthy of it." Vaylura let out a slow breath. "I will." The human's influence. As the court recovered from the shock, the Chancellor turned to her. "And what of the human?" Vaylura smirked. "He is not a suitor. He is not a noble. He is a man who taught me what no royal ever did." She paused. "He is a friend." Caleb, standing outside the palace, watching the lights above, had no idea that his name had just shaken an empire. But he was about to find out. The atmosphere inside the royal palace was tense, as though the air itself held its breath. Princess Vaylura's declaration had left the court in turmoil, and even hours later, whispers and gasps still echoed through the grand halls. But Vaylura stood firm, her golden eyes steady. Her decision to reject the suitors and choose her own path had shaken the foundations of Zerethus Prime's traditions. She knew there would be backlash, but she had made her choice, and she would not take it back. Caleb's return. Meanwhile, Caleb Drayton stood at the gates of the palace, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. He had left Vaylura hours ago, assuming she'd be busy with royal matters he couldn't begin to understand. He hadn't expected a summons. A royal messenger, a stiff, silver-clad attendant, had found him wandering the lower districts and delivered a simple message. "The princess requests your presence." Now, as the towering gates opened, Caleb couldn't help but feel out of place. He was a human, a nobody compared to the beings who lived in these opulent halls. Yet, something told him this wasn't just a friendly invitation. As he stepped inside, he noticed the stairs. Nobles, soldiers, and attendants all paused to watch the human walk past. Their gazes were filled with confusion, suspicion, and in some cases, thinly veiled hostility. Caleb tried not to let it bother him. He'd gotten used to being underestimated. At the far end of the grand corridor, he spotted her, Vaylura. She stood tall, her cloak gone, her royal robes shimmering under the glow of floating lanterns. She smiled faintly when she saw him, but her eyes held something more. Determination. "You called for me, Your Highness?" Caleb asked as he approached. Vaylura raised an eyebrow. "I thought we were past that." He grinned. "All right, Vaylura. What's going on?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Walk with me." A walk through the halls. They'd moved through the palace together, passing ancient tapestries and towering statues of past rulers. The grandeur of the place was almost overwhelming, but Caleb focused on the princess beside him. "You've caused quite a stir," Caleb remarked casually. Vaylura smirked. "So I've heard. And yet, here you are, still walking tall. Gotta say, I'm impressed." She glanced at him. "It seems I have you to thank for that." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Your words, your actions, they showed me that I could make my own choices, that I didn't have to follow the path everyone else laid out for me," she said softly. "Well," Caleb said with a shrug, "I was just being honest. Figured you deserved to know what it's like on the other side." Vaylura stopped and turned to face him. "Caleb, you did more than that. You changed the way I see everything. The court, the nobles, the suitors, they're all so focused on power and tradition that they forgot what it means to truly live. But you." She hesitated, her gaze dropping for just a moment before meeting his again. "You reminded me that life is about more than alliances and titles. It's about choices, about taking risks, and about standing for what you believe in." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then gave a small smile. I guess I just wanted to see what would happen if you broke the rules. Valera laughed softly, the sound echoing through the hall. Well, I did. And now, everything is changing. The council's decision. As they walked, Valera explained the situation. The nobles were still in an uproar. The suitors had demanded an official response. And the emperor, though calm, had made it clear that this new path would not be easy. I have to address the council tomorrow, Valera said. They want to know what my decision means for the empire. What are you going to tell them? Caleb asked. That I will rule in my own way, she replied. That I will choose alliances based on trust and mutual respect, not on the size of their war fleets. That I will make decisions not for personal gain, but for the good of my people. Caleb whistled softly. You're really shaking things up, huh? She smiled. Someone has to. As they reached the grand balcony overlooking the city, Valera gazed out at the lights below. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, taking in the view. You know, Caleb said, breaking the quiet, when I first got here, I never thought I'd be standing next to a princess, looking down at a city that's probably older than my planet's history. Valera turned to him. And I never thought I'd be standing here with a human who made me question everything I once believed. They shared a quiet laugh. A new beginning. As the night deepened, Valera knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, arguments, debates, and decisions that would shape the future of the empire. But for now, she allowed herself this moment of peace. Caleb's presence reminded her that change was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. Thank you, she said softly. He glanced at her, surprised. For what? For showing me what it means to live freely, she said. For reminding me that strength isn't just about power. Caleb smiled. Guess that means I'm a good teacher. Valera laughed. It means you're someone I'm glad to have met. As the stars above glimmered brightly, Valera felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just the end of her old life. It was the beginning of a new era, and she would face it head on.